My name is Evina March, and I've spent most of my life being expertly erased by the people who should have seen me most clearly, not through malice, that would have been easier to forgive, but through a kind of willful blindness that turned me into furniture in my own family's story. The evening started exactly as I'd expected. I entered the banquet hall in simple black, no rank visible, no military bearing on display, just another civilian guest at my sister's promotion ceremony. My mother's greeting was a perfunctory nod. My father's gaze slid past me like water off glass, and Corin, golden, radiant Corin, looked up from her table of fellow officers with that particular smile she reserved for awkward family obligations. "You made it?" she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for her colleagues to hear. "Still working at that records office or whatever it is you do?" The polite chuckles that followed felt like paper cuts. I smiled, said nothing, and took my assigned seat at the family table, far enough from the action to maintain the illusion that I belonged, close enough to witness every moment of Corin's triumph. But here's the thing about ghosts, we see everything, and sometimes, we remember. The golden child's shadow. Growing up March meant understanding your role in the family theater. Corin was the star, brilliant, charismatic, destined for greatness from the moment she could walk. She commanded rooms the way other children commanded toys, effortlessly, expectantly. My parents orbited her like devoted satellites, reflecting her light back to her in endless praise. "That one's going places," Dad would say, ruffling her hair while I stood beside them, invisible, clutching another book I'd devoured in hours instead of weeks. By high school, Corin was captain of everything that mattered, class president, already planning her military career with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Meanwhile, I disappeared into libraries, losing myself in foreign policy texts and military strategy manuals, not because anyone encouraged it, no one asked what I was reading, but because knowledge felt like armor against a world that seemed determined to overlook me. At 18, I left, no fanfare, no family send-off, just a quiet understanding that I'd stopped disrupting their narrative. Corin went to her prestigious military academy on a full scholarship, sending home photos of herself in crisp uniforms, medals glinting on her chest. Mom created a shrine to her service, complete with a sign reading "Service and Sacrifice." My name wasn't on it, but then again, they'd never asked for it. The silent war. What my family never knew, what they never bothered to discover, was that I'd enlisted too, not in Corin's flashy, ribbon-heavy world, but in the shadows where real work gets done. Military intelligence doesn't photograph well. It doesn't come with parades or ceremonies. It comes with security clearances and classified briefings and the kind of responsibility that keeps you awake at night. I started in signals intelligence, monitoring encrypted communications, finding patterns in digital noise that others missed. My work was invisible by design, no Facebook posts in uniform, no heroic war stories at family dinners, just quiet victories, supply lines saved, ambushes prevented, lives protected by information that arrived at exactly the right moment. By 30, I'd rotated through 5 postings and earned commendations I couldn't discuss. Eventually, I landed at a Pentagon think tank, advising on geopolitical threats and long-range strategic planning. My official title was deliberately vague, civilian defense consultant. It was cleaner that way. I worked behind locked doors, sometimes beside generals, sometimes in conference rooms where my security clearance outranked the uniformed officers around me. Once, I rewrote a logistics protocol that saved $18 million in projected losses, but when I mentioned working in defense analytics at a family gathering, Mom's response was immediate. "So, like Excel?" There were moments I considered correcting her, moments when I imagined laying it all out, where I'd been, what I'd done, the classified realities that would have kept her awake for weeks. But then I'd look at their faces, so confident in their version of me, and the impulse would fade. It wasn't pride keeping me silent. It was something closer to mercy. The last straw. The final insult came disguised as kindness. I was grabbing coffee in D.C. between classified meetings when Corin appeared, fresh from leave, glowing with the particular confidence of someone who'd just impressed a superior officer. "You should really think about going back to school," she said, leaning across the table like she was sharing state secrets. "I mean, you're smart. I bet you could get a job doing admin at a base somewhere." She meant it as generosity. That was the cruelest part. She genuinely believed she was offering me a ladder out of my imagined mediocrity into something approaching respectability. In her mind, she was being the good sister, finally extending a hand to lift me up. I sipped my coffee and said, "Thanks, Corin, I'll keep that in mind." That moment crystallized everything. They hadn't just failed to see who I was, They'd constructed an entire fantasy of who I wasn't and were living inside it like gospel truth. The banquet. The invitation arrived in gold-embossed splendor. You are cordially invited to the promotion banquet honoring First Lieutenant Corin March. At the bottom, Mom had added a handwritten note, if you attend, please don't draw attention. This is Corin's moment. I almost didn't go, but something about that carefully penned warning made me book a flight. I packed a simple black dress, no uniform, no insignia, no hint of affiliation, just a ghost returning to haunt familiar halls. The banquet hall buzzed with military precision. Officers in dress uniform clustered around tables, their ribbons and pins catching the light. Corin held court at the center, radiant and commanding, every inch the leader she'd always been trained to be. When she saw me approaching, her smile tightened imperceptibly. You made it, she announced, her voice carrying just the right note of surprised pleasure. Everyone, this is my sister, Evina, she works in admin, I think. Civilian sighed, right? Polite nods, a few tight smiles. Someone was already turning back to Corin for another story about field exercises. I smiled and said nothing, accepting my exile to the family table with practiced grace. The evening proceeded exactly as scripted. Corin's speech was confident and grateful. Toasts were raised. My parents glowed with reflected pride. No one asked what I did. No one wondered why I looked familiar to two visiting officers who kept glancing my way with furrowed brows. They assumed I was nothing, and I let them. The truth arrives. Then the atmosphere shifted, conversation softened, heads turned toward the entrance as Lieutenant General Halverson entered, 3 stars, former head of military operations strategy, a man whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. He scanned the room with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to reading situations instantly. His eyes found me, and something in his expression changed. Not surprise, exactly, recognition. He walked directly to my table, past my bewildered sister, past the suddenly silent officers, past my parents' confused faces. He stopped in front of me, looked me square in the eye, and offered a slow, crisp salute. Ma'am, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. It's an honor. I wasn't told you'd be attending. I rose instinctively, muscle memory awakening in my spine. I returned the salute, clean and steady. I wasn't sure I would, sir. His smile was genuine. Well, their gain. He extended his hand. Your work in Operation Delta saved lives. I never got to say thank you. I shook his hand. You just did. Behind him, Corin stood frozen, her confidence cracking like ice under pressure. My parents blinked, struggling to process what they were witnessing. A junior officer nearby, one who had laughed at Corin's earlier story, straightened and stared. You're that March? Someone whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth had arrived, not shouted or forced, just recognized. And the room, so loud with certainty moments before, fell into the kind of silence that changes everything. The reckoning, what followed wasn't drama. It was something quieter and more devastating, the slow collapse of a carefully constructed myth. Officers approached me respectfully. Some shook my hand. Others simply nodded. No one asked for details. The general's salute had spoken louder than any resume ever could. Corin came over last, wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. She stared at me for a long moment before speaking. You never said, she whispered. I looked up at her. You never asked. The answer seemed to knock something loose inside her. For a second, I saw the girl she used to be, ambitious and bright, but never cruel on purpose. Just unaware. Untaught. I didn't know, she said, softer now. No, I replied. You didn't want to. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired of being reduced to absence. Tired of letting their silence define me. But mostly, I wanted her to understand that silence doesn't always mean absence. That humility isn't invisibility. That sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones who never needed to be seen at all. For the first time in years, she didn't have a clever response. She just nodded, stepped back, and let the truth settle where it belonged. The exit. I left without ceremony. No fanfare, no dramatic speeches, just the steady sound of my heels against polished marble. Not in defeat, not in triumph, just in clarity. What needed to be seen had already unfolded, clean and sharp, like truth slicing through fabric. At home, I moved through the dark by instinct, opening the hallway closet to where my dress blues waited in their garment bag. I hadn't touched them in years. The uniform was exactly as I'd left it, sharp lines, ribbons in place, the nameplate reading simply March. No rank needed. The name had earned enough weight on its own. That uniform had stood in rooms most people never imagined, across from men who gave orders with their eyes. It had carried my voice into places where lives were balanced on data, instinct, and timing measured in seconds. But I'd never brought it to family dinners. I'd never corrected Corin when she spoke over me, never interrupted my parents when they changed the subject. I'd let them keep their version of me, not because I believed it, but because it cost less to let them be wrong than to demand they grow. But that night, Halverson's salute did what years of silence could not. It shifted the axis. They didn't ask questions after. They didn't need to. They just sat with the truth they'd spent decades avoiding. They had spent years narrating a story where I was missing. Now they'll spend the rest of their lives knowing I was never gone. I was just never where they expected me to be. I didn't need their validation. I never needed their permission. Because I was never trying to take the spotlight. I was the reason the spotlight had a stage to stand on.